Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Wow. Hey, Tim, come on over here. Look at this haunted YouTube bottle I just got on eBay. It's supposedly going to keep me safe from Slenderman.
Tim, I actually think that's the Yoo-hoo bottle that attracts Slenderman.
Oh, really? I was wondering why I was bidding against myself. Oh no, now I see Slenderman. What can protect me from him?
Well, you know there's only one thing that can protect you against Slenderman.
Really? What's that?
Why, Exploring the Bizarre show, of course.
Oh, of course. Yes, you're right. I see him fading away right now, and our guest starting to materialize right in front of us. And speaking of guests, how are you doing tonight, Tim? You out there in Jasper, Indiana?
Oh, yes, it's a beautiful night here in Jasper, Indiana. The stars are shining, the wind's blowing, the owls are hooting. So it's just an excellent, it's perfect night for Exploring the Bizarre.
You really have owls?
Oh, sure. Oh, well, and coyotes in the distance too. If you
and probably a couple of Bigfoot.
Not in this immediate area, but yeah, here in southwestern Indiana, they have been seen before.
Well, I don't think there's a state where Bigfoot hasn't been seen. We get a lot of reaction when we do our shows on cryptozoology, Dogman, Bigfoot, winged wonders of the world, and so forth and so on. But that's a little off topic tonight. So
just a little.
Why don't you tell us what the topic is for this evening?
Oh, we've got a great topic tonight, Tim. We've got two fantastic guests. We're going to be talking about haunted objects, haunted antiques, and Slenderman. So with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre, we have Neil Packer. Now, Neil's fascination with the paranormal began when he was a teenager and he saw his first apparition. And ever since then, he's been trying to figure out the truth about life after death. Well, in 2013, Packer got together with some other like-minded souls and started his own group for researching and investigating, the paranormal. But he actually discovered that his passion actually was with the research with haunted objects. So he started collecting his own kind of like weird and strange antiques, to the point that I guess that they were overflowing his car park. So that's when he started his own Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre at 11A Regent Street in the heart of Hinckley in England. So now he says that with new items regularly being added to the collection and the fact that the building is haunted itself, no two investigations within the center will be the same. Now, joining us as well is our good friend Nick REDFERN. Nick's been on with us a number of times, so I really don't have to say a lot about him, except that it's always a great pleasure to have Nick with us, and I will add that his most recent books include Shapeshifters, Morphing Monsters, and Changing Cryptids, The Roswell UFO Conspiracy, Exposing a Shocking and Sinister Secret, Control, MK Ultra, Chemtrails, and the Conspiracy to Suppress the Masses, and the book we'll be talking about tonight, The Slenderman Mysteries, an Internet Urban Legend Comes to Life. So, Nick, Neil, thank you very much for being with us on Exploring the Bizarre.
This is going to be a doozy. I love all these mysterious topics. You know, the house I lived in growing up had a little bit of poltergeist activity. I don't think we ever had any antiques that were haunted, but we're going to find out what we can, both about Slender Man, whether he really exists or not, and what constitutes a haunted object. Now, where are we speaking to you, Neil? Are you in the UK?
Yeah, I'm in Leicestershire in the UK.
Hmm. And well, let me see now. How long have you been involved in the paranormal? It kind of started out at a rather young age, did it?
My interest started when I was a teenager, but I really got involved in about 2013, so it's not many years really.
Hmm. And how did that come about?
I had a friend who was a medium, and we started a venue group together. We went to haunted locations around the UK, and we took guests with us to investigate.
Mm. Yeah, you know, there seems. Would you say that there's more interest in the occult and spiritualism and all in the UK than there is here in the US, or is it about parallel?
I think it's about parallel. I think the US is growing, but I think England's got more history. So we've got
Hmm.
older buildings and we've got castles and that sort of thing. So there'll always be an interest in the UK.
And of course the spiritualist movement is still very active there in England, as opposed to here in the U.S., where it's kind of dwindled outside of a few uh, places where they have like Camp Chesterfield and a few other places where they do congregate several times a year and have readings and so forth. I know I get the psychic news. In fact, I advertise in there out of the UK, and that magazine has been going for, I think, something like 80 or 90 years now, and it just turned into a big jumbo glossy magazine. But okay, well, tell us about the like your earliest paranormal experience that you can recall.
Well, that started when, like I said, when I was a teenager. I was out camping with a group of friends. Middle of the night or early hours of the morning, I got up and went outside. Looked over the fields towards the church. It was in a village. Looked towards the church. I saw a lady in a long flowing white dress. Obviously, that was a spirit. That scared the hell out of me. So I jumped back in the tent. Never said anything to anybody.
Well, now how could you tell though that it was? Why did you assume that it was a spirit and just not somebody in a flowing white dress?
Because she wasn't walking. It was just sort of floating down. So you could tell it wasn't anyone living.
And how far away from you was the apparition, and how long did it appear for? And when it vanished, did it just go poof, or did it walk through a wall, or how did the observation end?
It lasted a few minutes. She didn't disappear. I just ran back into the tent.
You disappeared.
Yeah, I quickly disappeared. So I ran back in the tent. A few years later, I found a book that was written about the village, and it was well documented that other people had seen this lady. She was actually jilted on a wedding day at the church, and she committed suicide.
And okay, so now, do you think that this is who you, the woman that you saw, was this individual?
I think it was, yeah.
Uh-huh. And how did you? I mean, were you scared or frightened, or just said, "This is really weird"? What was your attitude towards the observation?
I was scared. I was only a young teenager, perhaps even 12 or 13, something like that. So I was scared. I never told anyone for years and years. I didn't even tell my mum and dad.
Now, were there any other witnesses with you, or did you were you the lone witness?
I was on my own outside the tent.
Well, okay, so this was your first encounter with the unknown. How did it grow to where it is today in your collection of haunted artifacts?
The my interest was rekindled watching the normal TV shows. We got a famous TV show in the UK. So I started watching that, and so then I realised you can actually go to haunted locations to see if you can find anything. Then I started watching the American shows. I quickly did realise I didn't really want to spend all evening, all night in a cold castle. So I had this idea about haunted antiques. So I contacted about 20 antique shops around my local area, and only one replied, fortunately. So I started my investigations there.
And,
So now,
yeah, go ahead, Tim.
well, I was just going to say, so, well, when you contacted these antique shops, I mean, how did you go about it? Did you say, hey, you got any, hauntings in your shop? If you do, can we come by and visit?
No, I have this theory that everything we touch during our life, we leave a trace of our body energy behind.
Mm-hmm.
So the theory was antiques were loved items, and they would have been held emotions and energy from the previous owners. So I thought that's the best place to go because the antiques were loved. So I told them my theory, and only Sims Vintage Antique Centre replied, which I'm pleased about. Really, I think we're all following a path and we're guided, and that was my chosen path.
Okay, so what the one that did respond to you? I mean, what was their deal? I mean, what did they say to you? And did they like, oh yeah, oh my gosh, the ghosts are just crawling out of the woodwork here. Come over.
Well, they're excuse me, they're interested in the paranormal anyway. So the two owners. So I went to see them, told them what I wanted to do. At the time, I wanted to make a series of videos. I'd spend the evening in the antique centre, choose a different item, and see if we can draw any spirits forward through it. And it did work. I've since gone away from the recorded videos. I only do live feeds now on Facebook, and they're proving really, really popular.
So now the first antique shop that you went to, I mean, did they have like some specific items that they said, yeah, we got a creepy feeling about these things, or did they just let you come in and go at it?
They just let me go and come in. I took a medium with me. He was picking up different spirits. I'm fascinated by World War items. I think they hold lots of emotions and lots of energy. So war items like helmets, and one of the items I got is a baby gas mask, which is a hideous looking thing, and that's full of emotions, and we can get the energy to communicate with us.
All right, Tim, I had stepped on your question previously, so I apologize for that. But I'm fascinated by this idea that you can have an object that can, I don't know, retain energy or act almost like a tape recorder. That's been a popular theory for decades, that a haunted house could possibly be nothing more than a replaying of a tragic or an emotional state that happened at one time. I mean, do you think that this is part of it when you're dealing with these kinds of objects, or do you think that there could actually be an intelligence involved as well?
I think it's both. I think some items do. It's like a recording, like you said, but the energy. I think if you tap it, if you have the right people around you, you can tap into the energy. And I'm not saying all my items are actually haunted as such. I think a haunted item is the spirits, the actual spirits with it all the time. But
now, would you say that these objects have a negative connotation, or Are some of them cursed? I mean,
none of my objects are actually negative. They're all positive spirits, apart from one, which is a voodoo doll. So that has got it's not really bad, but it's just quite a mischievous, nasty entity attached to it. So we do contain that. So that spirit's not wandering around the building.
how do you research the background of an object?
Well, so we search through the internet once we get an item. We're always drawn to the items that we get. It's like I said, we believe we've got spirit guides and they're guiding us. So I can go to a shop and a voice in my head says, go to that corner and there's an item that's interesting to me. But research is we do an item of the week live feed on Facebook. So we get lots and lots of comments from people who sense things around the items. So they can give us names and places, and then we can research what they're telling us.
So would you say that you have mediumistic powers yourself?
Me personally, no. I can sense when spirits are around me. I go all tingly around my neck. But I've got a good team with me, and they've all developed their own ways of sensing spirit around us. So that's how we work. We all work as a team with different attributes.
How many people in your team?
There's 7 of us.
And are they men and women? Are they all of the same age group, or how would what is the composition of the group?
Yeah, there's one more man besides me. The rest are women. We range in ages. I'm the oldest, so they call me Grandad actually. So we range from.
They call me worse than that, so don't feel bad.
I think it's a sign of respect, so I'm quite happy with it. I think the youngest is in the early 30s, and I'm 58, so it's that age range.
Mm-hmm. And would you say, I mean, like before you obtain an object, you go out and you purchase them, or they're given to you, or?
Most of the items we've purchased through antique centres or car boot sales. Mm-hmm. But we are now actually getting items sent to us. People have messaged me and says they've got an item, would I be interested in it? And depends what it is. I say yeah. So that's how the collection is building up.
Well, now, okay, let's say you know about an object, and somebody tells you that they have an object that is believed to be haunted. Would you take someone with you who might be a psychic in the group so that they can ascertain whether that's true or not?
Yeah, I'd take one of the girls who are really sensitive to it, and if she says, yeah, something of interest, I'm not saying it's going to be haunted, but if it's got an interesting feel to it or an interesting look about it, and the voices in their head say, yeah, that's interesting, we can work with that. That's how we.
Well, okay, let's see, what am I trying to say? What are the age of the objects? I mean, are some of them hundreds of years old? Are some of them more recent and vintage?
And the oldest items we got is from the English Civil War. So that was 1600s. That's the oldest. That's musket shot. The most modern probably would have been from the 60s.
And what is that?
What, from the 60s?
Yes.
Let me think. It's I can't think off the top of my head actually.
Put you on the spot there.
Yeah, I can't think. I've got so many items.
Oh, well, okay. Well, how many items do you think that you have total so far?
I think I've well over 50 items now. So it's building nicely.
Are they all on display? I mean, if somebody comes into your shop, I mean, can they see them all, or do you have to have some in storage every now and then?
No, everything's on display, which is different to most places, I think. Like museums, everything's behind glass, so no one can touch them. The way I wanted my centre to run is, we've got a wheelchair from the Second World War hospital. If people want to sit in the wheelchair, they're allowed to do so, and so they can tell us what they're feeling and what they're sensing from the wheelchair as well.
That's a great idea, because then you actually have participation in it, and do okay. So let's say one visitor comes and sits in the wheelchair and goes along, and they pick up some vibration on a particular object that you have. Have you ever had like a confirmation, somebody else to come along later on and say almost the same thing, or kind of reinforce what the initial individual had told you?
Yeah, we've had that quite a few times. When we encourage people to write, we've got a day book, we call it. We encourage people to write in that what they feel from different items, and then we just compare, and we've got quite a few the same comments coming through. So that's really interesting.
What would you say is your most haunted item?
I think that would be the wheelchair from the rehabilitation hospital during the war.
So that's haunted too.
Yeah, there's lots of energy around that, because as you can imagine, there'd been lots of different soldiers sitting in there. Some had their limbs amputated, some had mental issues after the war. So there's lots and lots of energy around that, and different people pick up on different energies. So that's just building.
Would you say that a good number of the artifacts that you have are war related?
I do have a little section of war items. I've got quite a few helmets. So I think war is very emotion driven. So they do hold onto lots of energy.
Have any spirits ever appeared in the shop?
We haven't actually seen it. We put some on the SLS camera. That turns into a stick man. We've seen quite a few of them.
You've seen what kind of men?
The SLS camera maps humans. We think it also maps spirits. So if there's no humans standing in front of the camera, and you see it like a stick man, we think that's spirit.
Well, we'll have to find out after the break whether they're related to Slenderman.
Okay.
Could be a relative there, but fascinating stuff. And we're coming out on our break, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. And stay tuned for some more exciting paranormal adventure.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz, and tonight we are talking about haunted or energetic objects and antiques and the Slender Man. So we're going to bring Nick Redfern into the conversation now, Tim. Nick has a new book out called The Slender Man Mysteries, an internet urban legend comes to life. And I have to say, Nick, excellent book. I've been reading it the past week or so, and just really enjoy it a lot. And the subject of your book really fits in well, I think, with tonight's program, because we're talking about Neil and his shop that has objects that could have absorbed vibrations or developed even a consciousness of her own, and that's somewhat of your thesis about Slenderman. So, for I suppose our listeners out there who have been living in a cave for the past decade or so, why don't you tell us a little bit about Slenderman?
Yeah, sure. Well, the phenomenon, if you like, sort of began in the summer of 2009. And what happened was that there's a website called Something Awful, and they had this kind of contest to see who could come up with the creepiest character, if you like, for the internet era. And a lot of people submitted sort of like Photoshop pictures, to create a sort of a spooky supernatural picture. And one of the people who did this was a guy named Eric Knudsen. And his picture of this sort of 7 to 9 foot tall, skinny figure in a black suit, a white shirt, skinny black tie, with these octopus-like tentacles coming out of its back, and a face which lacked eyes, nose, mouth, and ears. It was just like a faceless face. And he was dubbed the Slenderman. And it was sort of seen as this sort of creepy type of character that would lurk deep in the woods, and very dangerous character as well. And I should stress, it wasn't created as like a hoax. It was like a genuine contest to see who could come up with something, the worst thing for the internet, so to speak. In no time at all, it became pretty much like a phenomenon where blogs were set up, chat rooms, forums. A show was actually created, an online show called Marble Hornets, kind of like a found footage type fictional thing. Each episode was about 20, 30 minutes and, achieved a gigantic audience. And so in other words, in very quick time, you had this Slenderman image take off to where you had literally thousands of kids, teenagers, adults, really digging into this, and these people started to write their own stories about the Slender Man and create their own pictures and give him a backstory, and background, that kind of thing. And it went on like that for quite a few months. Now, I was aware of the whole phenomenon when it began, but I wasn't overly interested in, just an internet contest to create a weird image. It just wasn't something that really caught my attention. What did catch my attention, though, was round about, a number of months afterwards, when the creation, when people started to claim that they had seen the Slender Man in the real world, in woods and forests, just like in the creation by Eric Knudsen, but also in their bedrooms. That people reported sleep paralysis, this phenomenon where, you wake up in the middle of the night, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., unable to move, and you see this creepy character like the Slender Man looming over you. And now, of course, there are a couple of different theories for sleep paralysis, that it's, due to the complexities of the mind and lack of sleep and stress. And then you have the theory that it's some sort of literal supernatural invader that invades the bedroom late at night and prevents you from moving. And the more that I started to look into these claims of real reports, it became clear to me from my own belief system that what had happened was that inadvertently, and not deliberately, but with literally, as it has become, like tens and tens of thousands of people obsessing and thinking about the Slender Man, talking about it, researching it, sharing information with other people online, etc., etc. What happened, as I see it at least, is that the intense belief almost, the lines became blurry between fiction and fact. And I think what happened is that when there was this huge obsession on the part of tens of thousands of kids, teenagers, etc., I think what happened is that inadvertently what is known as a tulpa in Tibetan terms, or a thought form, was created. In other words, if enough people focus on something deeply, intensely, they dream about it, they're fixating on it, that the collective mindset of so many people can create a real world supernatural version of a fictional entity. In other words, something strides out of the imagination into the real world, but in some sort of in a supernatural form. Now, of course, a lot of people might say, well, it's just people whose imaginations have just sort of gone too far, and they've lost the plot, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And I think there's room for several different books to be written on the Slender Man. I'm sure a psychiatrist could write a really good book from the perspective of it being, something, a phenomenon born out of the mind. And again, with that angle of the the blurring of the lines. But my book, I wrote it specifically from the perspective of my own conclusions and theories. And, my view is that the Slender Man has come to life in some strange degree as a thought form. So in other words, the book is actually it's not an unbiased book. It's a biased book, It's biased towards the theory that I come to the conclusion. That's why people get that from the subtitle of the book, which is An Internet Urban Legend Comes to Life. I didn't want people to think this was, anything other than what it really is, a study of that particular theory. And the whole issue of thought forms sort of fascinate me, and have for a long time. The idea that, the sort of the psychic ability of the human mind, multiply that by tens of thousands of people, all thinking of one issue, and then suddenly people start to see it. And now, there are different theories as to what the tulpa actually is, whether, you sort of look at the original Tibetan stories and how it's all also become modified in more recent years. And you have the angle of some people believe that that tulpas, thought forms, can only really exist if we continue to believe in them. If we stop believing in them, they start to fragment and dissolve. Other people take the view that they kind of survive on and thrive on human energy, if you like.
Well, now, Nick, what was the Slender Man? Was he created as a sinister being? Because certainly there's been a lot of negative what would you say, negativity associated with this figure, and of course the very well-known incident where the two teenage girls took their friend into the woods and stabbed her numerous times because they were trying to get under the good graces of Slenderman. I mean, was it created as a negative figure, or is that just something that came about on its own?
No, well, I mean, what happened was Eric Knudsen, when he created the Slenderman for this contest, by his own admission, he had a number of inspirations for the Slenderman. For example, there was he was a big fan of the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. So almost certainly,
I can see that. Yes.
Yeah, in one sense, that might explain, the tentacles, the octopus-like tentacles coming out of its back, with the Lovecraft sort of obsessions with, strange, rubbery type creatures, living under the oceans, that kind of thing. And he also, Lovecraft talked about seeing in his dream state at night these creatures that he called night gaunts, which were faceless monsters, basically. So, the Slenderman was faceless. But also, and I'm sure you remember this story, well, you won't remember the story, Tim, but you'll know of it. Back in the 1940s in the town of Mattoon in Illinois, there was this weird story of what was known as the Mad Gasser of Mattoon.
Oh yeah, Tim has written on that. Yeah, he's written a chapter or two on that.
The Mad Gasser of Mattoon was kind of like an early proto Man in Black, and of course the Slender Man is dressed in a black suit. Now, Eric Knudsen, when he created these photoshopped images, he actually it wasn't just pictures of the Slender Man, it was pictures of the Slender Man lurking in the background where there were groups of kids in the forefront of the pictures. So the implication was that the Slender Man, was a sinister, disturbing threat to kids. So, everything about the Slender Man to start with, regardless of whether or not you believe it's just a fictional entity or you think it may now have gone further than that, there's no doubt that, that just the imagery alone kind of, caught people's attention, and not necessarily for a good reason, mainly because it was just so creepy and disturbing, the image of like a predatory figure in the woods staring at kids. It doesn't conjure up anything positive at all. It's just totally negative,
Well, now, there has been other historical supernatural creatures that they didn't have the name Slender Man, but I I remember seeing, like Victorian era drawings of creatures that bear a striking resemblance to Slenderman. The almost insect-like arms and legs, but rather than being in a suit and tie, they're dressed in more period costumes. So I mean, we're talking about something though that has really been in. I guess the human consciousness for a long time.
Yeah, that's actually a good question, or good point, because I do mention that in the book. Although Eric Knudsen created the Slenderman image in the summer of 2009, June 2009, you can find parallels with similar things in the past. And, I talk about this in the book. One of the people I interviewed, a guy named Robin Swope, who also wrote a book on the Slenderman a few years ago. I interviewed Robin, and he feels that although Eric Knudsen undeniably created the Slenderman in its current form, Robin suspects that what Knudsen actually did subconsciously and unknowingly conjured up an ancient archetype of something that has been around for a long, long time. And I mean, I talk in the book about, for example, the old kid's story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, which is this sort of tall, skinny figure who strides into town in the German town of Hamelin and promises to get rid of all the rats in town, and the mayor doesn't honour his part of the bargain to pay the piper. And so this tall, creepy character with this supernatural pipe leads all the kids into the woods and into the mountains, and they disappear into like a kind of portal. It's not a particularly it's not a particularly entertaining story for kids, really, if you think about it.
Well, you could almost say the same then about Hansel and Gretel with the Hagen figure beckoning the children into the woods once again.
Yeah, and a lot of these old, just as an aside, a lot of those old fairy tales and folk tales are quite disturbing, when you actually dissect them bit by bit. But there are other stories as well. I mean, one of the people who I spoke with was a guy named Mike Johnson. And Mike Johnson, I grew up in central England, about 5 miles from an old city called Lichfield. And one of these situations where, again, there was like an old or pre-Slenderman type story. Now, not super old, but I interviewed this guy, Mike Johnson, and he had an encounter in 2001 with a creature that found on an area of woodland in central England called the Cannock Chase, which was about 5 or 6 miles from where I grew up from, and a lot of supernatural activity there. And Mike told me how in 2001 he'd seen this sort of tall, 8-9 foot tall thing with a face that you could not distinguish properly, had these long arms down to its knees. And oddly, it was standing behind a couple of other people on the Cannock Chase Woods, and they couldn't see it. Well, it was clear they couldn't see it because they weren't reacting to it. And he felt disoriented, he couldn't get his bearings, he couldn't figure out which way was north and south, etc. And then suddenly everything returned to normal and the creature was gone. But what's important is that, yes, it occurred in 2001, but Mike gave me the story like 5 years before the Slenderman was even created. So you can find these earlier archetypes of the Slenderman almost identical to Eric Knudsen's version, but long before he actually created it. So again, I think we're dealing with several things: the thought form version, but also, as you said, something deeply in the subconscious, that may all be sort of primed for certain types of creatures or entities to be created because it is deep in our subconscious.
Well, it kind of it brings me to thinking about the shadow people, which isn't the Slender Man, but it's kind of a shadowy form that has been seen now by many people, and I mean, a lot of people have researched this and written on it and take it rather seriously. Would there seem to be a whole group then of some of these topras or something working independently or perhaps together from time to time? That's a frightening thought, actually.
Well, this is where it kind of gets a little bit confusing. Now, of course, if you've got, say, I don't know, 100,000 kids, teenagers, thinking about this, like I said, fixating on it, obsessing about it, and some sort of thought form is created, the big question is, are all the people who see it, when it becomes a thought form, are they all seeing the same one, or is it their very own independent Slenderman and somebody else sees their version of it? There could, if you look at it from that perspective, there could be multiple Slender Men, all manifesting for different people, rather than it just being one thought form having been created. And I'll give you an example as to how this has happened in other experiences and cases. One of the stories that I tell in the book revolves around a famous English comic book writer named Alan Moore. Now, to give you an idea of sort of the level of success he's had, he created the Constantine character for the comic book, whereas he's this sort of demon hunting character who was played by Keanu Reeves in the 2005 movie version. And Alan Moore also created the V for Vendetta character in the movie of the same name. So he's a big figure in comic book world. Now Alan Moore's gone on record as saying that when he was creating or envisaging the Constantine character, he was focusing deeply on him, how he would look, his appearance, his character, his eyes, his hair, his weight, the clothes that he wore. And Alan Moore really, sort of worked hard to come up with a definitive character, so to speak. And he actually based him on Sting from The Police. That was the kind of image that he had for him. Now, bear in mind that Alan Moore was sort of focusing on this and, trying to get it all straight in his mind. And he said one day, at the height of doing all this, he was sitting in a restaurant on the River Thames in London, and he said that he looked up and he saw what was quite literally the Constantine character that he created coming towards him with kind of almost like a sinister, sly, conspiratorial smile on his face, as if almost like a warning. And it freaked Alan Moore out so deeply that he just didn't know what to do. He was kind of frozen there, just staring. And he thought about following him, but didn't. And, the Constantine thought form, if you like, then vanished. So, that is another example of how, the mind concentrating on something can inadvertently create something where it then becomes self-aware and has some sort of
of course about Philip.
Yeah, exactly. That's another good example. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's actually a book was written about that. I think for the listeners who are not familiar, there was a group where they were up in Canada, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and they were holding seances and all, and they decided that they wanted to create a fictitious spirit, and it had some of the same properties that supposed real spirits had in the seance room, and it was almost as if they were communicating with a living entity.
That's right, but they'd actually created it, and it took on its own independent life, if you like, as this character Philip from several hundred years ago in England, and like I said, he became self-aware, and it's kind of like giving birth supernaturally rather in the regular way, And
but Philip never.
One of the big theories.
Well, I was going to say, but Philip never took on an appearance. It just basically was just
Yeah, that was sort of like rapping on the table, but the basic theme was the same. You create something, and then you are able eventually to have contact with it and speak with it, but it never really existed. That's the odd thing of the Philip story. The people who created him ended up talking to him, and he spoke back, but he never ever existed. And that's kind of like the Slenderman. Eric Knudson's Slenderman absolutely was a fictional creation. Now, though, people are saying, well, has it gone more than just a fictional creation? Has it become something else? And so that's basically, the theme that I've followed with the book, is to sort of look at it from that perspective of, you have the original Slenderman on the internet, and then you have this sudden, spontaneous second Slenderman surface.
Which makes me think, though, what makes us real? Are we just a Slender Man in somebody else's universe? I mean, what is the difference between us and Slender Man?
Well, there's no doubt that this sort of story does take people down different paths. It's like, what is reality? What is consciousness? If the Slender Man does exist in a thought form version, does it know what it's actually doing, or is it just like some old video loop? Just following the sort of pattern that he does in the fictional tales? Or does he know what he's doing? So a lot of questions come to mind when you look into this, and that's why, as I said, I'm sure somebody like a psychiatrist could do an equally good book, but look at it from a more psychological perspective, because there's no doubt it crosses different ground, in terms of how you look at it and what your own angle on it is.
All right, Nick, let me interrupt you here because we are coming up to our top of the hour break, and when we return, we will continue this conversation about haunted objects and Slender Man on Exploring the Bizarre, so stay tuned.
Exploring the Bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. Sorry, Tina, I had my mic muted and didn't realize that. We're back on the second hour, and tonight we are talking with Neil Packer and Nick Redfern. And Neil, I wanted to ask you, in the first part of the show, you were talking about, and am I pronouncing this correctly? Is it the Kinect camera?
Yeah, it's the SLS camera. I think it was designed for the Xbox.
Right. It is a Xbox, PlayStation, one of those. But it was made to map out the motions of the player. And somewhere along the line, I guess somebody noticed that every once in a while this thing was mapping out figures that weren't in the room. Am I correct on this?
Yeah, that's right. It's really good, actually.
So, I mean, how have you been using it? With your research, and are you using it in your shop?
Yes, we use it. In my centre, we got a back room which we call the live feed and sounds room. We have the SLS camera set up there, so if people come in, they can actually look and see if they can see figures. And fortunately, so far, whenever someone goes into the room, it maps them going in, then they just stand to the side, and quite often another figure will come. So they actually see it for themselves, and they find it fascinating.
So now, the building that your museum is located in, you said in your bio that it's reportedly haunted as well.
Yeah, it's one of the oldest streets in the town. And since we've had the building, we did an overnight investigation there before I put the items in, just so we had baseline tests, so we knew about the electricity and all that sort of stuff. And we had communication with the spirits actually in the building anyway, so that's even better for me.
All right, now so you say communication with the spirit. I mean, how are you doing this? I mean, you using a Ouija board or just getting like psychic impressions?
Yeah, we have a medium with us as well, and she was picking up things. She was picking up people, spirit people, and also the SLS camera was mapping people that weren't there, and we were hearing footsteps, we were hearing talking, all sorts of things. We don't tend to use Ouija boards now. Not that we're scared of them. It's just that they're so easily manipulated by the people that we don't tend to use them.
So, I mean, have you gotten any information on the people that could still be there in that area? I mean, like names or dates or anything like that?
And we know the area. When we first moved in, the medium picked up on an old cobbler. Since then, we've researched the area, and there was a cobbler's shop on the ground floor. We know there used to be in the alley. There used to be street fights, proper street fighting sort of tournaments. We've researched that, and that actually happened. So we are piecing together the whole picture.
Wow. So when you are dealing with a haunted location, like your building, and I know this is just speculation on your part, do you think that most of the time you are dealing actually with people who were once alive and are now dead, or like you were saying about some of the objects that you have in your museum are actually just more kind of like a residual energy.
Yeah, well, we're fortunate because we are both. We've picked up on like the stone tape theory, a recording. We've picked up two men fighting, but they won't communicate. We've picked them up on the SLS camera again. They won't. If you say, "Can you wave?" They just carry on doing what they're doing. So we think they're just ghosts. They're just a replay. But the other spirits that are in the building, they will wave to you. They will move when you ask them to move, and they will tap when you ask them to tap.
So
we got both sorts.
That's creepy.
Good.
So you're saying then that these figures being picked up on this camera are, or at least some of them are actually responsive to your verbal instructions.
Yes, definitely. We've caught one. We were doing a live feed, sort of questions and answers. The viewers were sending questions we were answering, and one of the viewers said, "There's a dwarf just come in." She's a medium, and we had the SLS camera. And when she said that, and we said it during the night, and this dwarf was picked up on the SLS camera, and it went and sat on the table in front of us, and all the viewers could see this little figure sitting on the table in front of us, that was fascinating. We've also, Monday night's live feed was based around a bayonet during the war, and so I played Vera Lynn's old song from the war, and the stick man came, and he looked like he was dancing to the music. So that was fascinating.
Wow. So now, has anybody actually seen a full body apparition, just under, not using the camera, but just using, like your regular video camera? Or have any of yourself or any of your group seen an apparition during these times?
Not in my centre up to now. It's only been open a couple of weeks, so we've got plenty of time. But we have heard footsteps, and we have seen shadows. So the energy is definitely building in the room, and I think that'll only grow as we do more nights.
Now, okay, here you have a collection of objects that are obviously energetic in one way or the other. Okay. Let me backtrack a little bit, because I wanted to ask you this previously. How can you tell the difference between something that comes into you that is just, like a regular wheelchair, or like a regular bric-a-brac, and something that does have some kind of energy or whatever or vibration or whatever you want to call it behind it? What is the difference?
There's no difference really, because I think everything has energy around it. Some energy is intelligent and will communicate back. Some people will sense things, like I've said on the live feeds. People will sense different things. It's not that they're seeing spirits; they're just sensing energy around that object. So it's just senses primarily.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you think that that some items can actually have, say, like an actual a deceased human, spirit attach itself to it for whatever reason?
Yeah, definitely. We've got quite a few items that the spirit's actually there all the time with it. We've got a death photo. Death photos were popular in Victorian England. So we got a photo of a girl, and she was actually deceased when they took the picture, and she's actually in my centre. She's always stays with the photo, which is a bit sad. She always stands in the corner, which is what different people have sensed, and mediums have said. There's a little girl standing in the corner. So she is always there. We've got a doctor's bag from the Victorian England. There's two men always by the bag. One was the doctor, and one was the doctor actually murdered people as well, so he wasn't a nice doctor. So we've got the doctor at hand and his victim, one of his victims, there all the time. They never communicate. They just stand around this bag.
All right. So why would you think that, okay, say like the little girl attached to the death photo, why would she be attached to that photo and not to, say, like where she lived and died, or enjoyed life, or whatever? I mean, to me it would seem unusual that the photo would be the draw for her, and not someplace that she had been emotionally attached to when she was alive.
Yeah, that's very true. I think she in particular is attached to that photo because she hates the photo, and she's never forgiven her parents for sort of having the photo taken, because it's not a very nice photo. You can see there's clearly something wrong with her. In her forehead and her hands. They hadn't positioned her right. So we believe she is so upset about that photo that she's sort of put all her energy into it for some unknown reason. Perhaps one day we'll find out. We have, because we own all the items, we can actually do more work with them, so we can find out eventually the reason why.
Now I know Tim Beckley asked in previously about cursed items, and it makes me think about, and I think it was located there somewhere in England. There was a painting. Actually, I think even the prince of this painting, what was it? It was like the crying boy or something like that. Yeah, anybody who had that, their house would burn down, or some kind of horrible thing would happen. I mean, do you put any stock in any of these kinds of stories?
We do actually have a picture of the crying boy in the centre. I personally, I don't. It's just the only reason I bought this picture is because it sort of goes hand in hand with what we're doing. People know about it and they ask questions about it. So I've researched it. So I've got a plaque next to it, telling the story of it. But I think these pictures were mass produced and they're just prints. So personally, I don't buy into this crime boy story.
Right. Well, I mean, have any of your psychics, tried to get any impression off of it, and just like that? There's nothing here.
No, we haven't done any work on crime boy yet. That will come when we get around to it, because we've got so many items and so many more interesting items than the picture.
So now, have you? You said earlier that you've had people contacting you about their own items, and I mean, are people wanting to donate them to you, or are they trying to say trying to make a buck and sell things to you, or are they just more interested in just get this damn thing out of my house?
Some people want. They contact me and say about this. They tell me this big elaborate story about this item, and I say, yeah, you can always send it to me, and they'll say, how much will you pay? And as soon as the people say that, I think, no, I'm not interested, because there's no proof that I'm going to get anything from it, and plus I think they just want to make the money, like you said. I'm more interested when people contact me and say they've had all this activity happening. Can I send it to you? And they'll send it to me free of charge. So that's more interesting to me, because they're not making anything from it. They're just interested to see what we can pick up.
And the majority of the stuff that you get, I mean, is there something to it? I mean, can like your psychic friends take a hold of it and say, oh yeah, this is this is something good. You got a hold of something really good here.
Yeah, so far everything that we've been sent or we've been given, we have had something from it with the mediums. So it's working out well so far. Obviously, I will eventually start getting stuff that's not really worth my time, to be honest. But I'll accept anything that people want to send to me, because they obviously believe there's something to it, and so I'll look into it for them.
See, okay, now there's the factor there. They believe that there could be something to it, which, Nick, I wanted to bring you into this conversation again, because that brings us back to Slenderman, because here we have, as you were saying, almost this collective belief system that brought about with the help of the internet, which makes me wonder if something like this would have been possible without the internet. But you have this collective belief that really seemed to almost bring this thing alive. It developed a reality all of its own.
Yeah, and I think you could potentially apply that angle to a lot of unsolved mysteries. I mean, I'm not that well versed in the sort of things that Neil researches. He knows way more about this than I do. But, I do sometimes wonder if some ghosts may actually be, you've got a situation where the relatives of somebody dies and they're so crushed and destroyed, having lost the husband, wife, or whatever, and they just want to see him one last time. I sometimes wonder, if not in every case, obviously, because like Neil said, there could be different explanations for different phenomena. But I do sometimes wonder if somebody sees a dead relative, if it could actually be, the mind has created like a thought form version, the subconscious part of your mind essentially giving you like a safety net, like a comfort blanket kind of thing, almost to reassure you, and and your subconscious may have actually done it itself, so to speak. But again, I don't think it explains everything, but I do sometimes wonder if it might explain some cases at least.
It makes me think about, there was a Japanese anime made back in the 1990s called Serial Experiment Lane, where it starts out with kids basically committing suicide because they wanted to start living in, they called it, I think, The Wire, which, basically, they were just talking about the internet. And then as the story progresses, it's almost like the internet itself has developed a consciousness, an intelligence all of its own, and actually starts to think of itself almost as God, and then starts to manifest itself in the real world. And the main character, eventually you find out, is not a living person like we are, but is actually a physical manifestation from The Wire. And it's just, we see things like Slenderman and some of these other memes that have taken on a life of their own. And again, it's just like, is reality mimicking fiction, or is fiction mimicking reality?
Well, that's the big question, or is it a bit of both? But It's interesting you bring up the issue of the internet, because there is this sort of school of thought, the idea that the internet is becoming self-aware, and I mentioned that in the book mainly because one of the people I interviewed for the book was a girl named Lacey, and she's actually a full flight attendant now, but she was a trainee flight attendant when I interviewed her. And she, by her own admission, had an interest in the Slenderman phenomenon, which developed quite quickly into like a full-blown obsession. And you do find that does happen sometimes in relation to the Slenderman. Mm-hmm. And she basically did all her research sort of online on the internet. She took part in a lot of chat rooms and forums, and she printed off a bunch of pictures of the people who had made of the Slenderman and framed them and put them in one of her rooms. And it was almost like a Slenderman room, so to speak. And she did read, by her own admission, as I said, she got really deep into it to where it sort of took up a lot of her free time. And she told me that on one occasion that when she was on her laptop, and again, like so many people, she was so deeply into all this, she saw like almost like a figure, almost like a shadowy figure on the laptop of like this spindly, skinny character. Then another occasion, she said very briefly, she saw this sort of faceless face. And then on the third occasion, she actually heard a voice coming through, basically through the mic. And I forget the exact words now, but it was along the lines of, "We're friends now," or now we are friends, that kind of thing. And that was kind of the last straw for her. And she told me that what she did, she actually got rid of all her files, took down all the pictures, threw them out. And I mentioned Robin Swope earlier, who wrote an earlier book on the Slenderman, and she had a copy of Robin's book, and she didn't actually throw out Robin's book. What she actually did, she burned it. What she did, she put it in like a metal container in the sink and set it on fire. And she was so stressed, she didn't think about the fact of the alarm, the fire alarm going off in the apartment. So she had to sort of quickly, when it went off, she had to quickly go to the front door of her apartment and just throw it outside and let it sort of burn up itself. That's how sort of her mind was in a whirl. And but yeah, she literally burned the book, Robin's book. And so you do have this crossover where you've got the original Slenderman as a fictional creation, then you've got the thought form version, and then there's a possibility that, if you focus on something on the internet, is the internet becoming aware of your patterns? And are we seeing something similar to the, something like the Matrix, where you have this online world, and, like in the Matrix movies, we're actually living in the world we think we're living in is like an online dream world, but the real world is, we're all in these pods providing energy to the robots. So, you do have that kind of crossover, and just a weird set of situations, really.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we need to go to our bottom of the hour of the break. I can't believe we're already this far into the show. So when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Neil Packer and Nick Redfern on exploring the bizarre. So stay tuned for more spooky stuff.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Okay, final segment of Exploring the Bizarre, so I better get our questions in before we run out of time. So Neil, talking with Nick and discussing the idea of things basically developing, like a life and consciousness all their own. There's a theory, and this has been a prevalent theory for centuries. Actually, philosophers have loved to kick this one around. That basically, everything in the universe has consciousness. Now, of course, the more, I suppose, the more developed the thing, the greater the consciousness. But I know that Buddhism and certain aspects of Hinduism, looks at it, like even rocks have a form of consciousness. So now here you have been collecting, antiques and other objects that you say are energetic. Do you think that these items have to have a human element to energize them, or do you think that that some of these things could actually just go off on their own, so to speak?
Well, I'm researching that. It's a theory that I have that everything you touch, you leave a trace of your energy on it, and so that's how I'm basing what we do. That you go through your life, you touch it, you leave your trace of your energy on it. So we are tapping into that energy. So I think we are looking into personal interaction with the items.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, since there have been people on this planet for a long, millions of years, probably. So basically, that you're talking about really everything has that vibration, so to speak.
Yeah. So far, excuse me. So far, everything we've done, we've been able to get to interact with energy. Perhaps we'll get to an item once soon that we won't be able to get some reaction to. But so far, every single thing that we've researched into, we've found some energy on it that we can tap into.
Wow, that's fascinating. Have you ever attempted, taking your mediums out someplace, and just touch, say, like maybe like a standing stone or something along those lines?
I would love to. Yeah. We've got Stonehenge. I would love to go there and see if what energy we can pick up from them, especially. But standing stones, we got standing stones not far away. You know, we're not far from Cannock Chase.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something else that we really want to do. It's just finding time at the minute because we all work full time. So this is sort of a sideline at the minute. We are hoping that it will get big enough to become full time, to give us more chance to research even further.
So we have a question from Jerry, and Jerry wants to know, Neil, that first of all, he wants to know if you're familiar with Zach's Museum, and that's Zach, I think from what is it, Ghost Adventures?
Ghost Adventures. Yes, I know Zach's Museum. I've seen pictures.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think about his museum, his collection?
I would love to go, but I think his is slightly different from mine. I don't think you're allowed to touch the items. I think he goes more for the negative sort of side of things, whereas most of ours is positive. Obviously, if someone sent us something that did have a negative attachment, we'll accept that and we'll work with that as well. It doesn't frighten me at all. But I would love to go to Zach's Museum and perhaps even do some live feeds from there. That would be fascinating.
Well, and Jerry's other question is it safe to have that many objects in one place? I mean, you said that right now you've got over 50 items. I mean, that's a lot of energetic items in one location. I mean, is it safe? I mean, is there a chance you end up with a psychic tornado sometime?
That's fascinating. The energy certainly is building in the centre. You can actually feel it when you go in, and I do think the more energy that we build in our centre, it attracts more spirits from the surrounding area, so they're coming as well. So the possibility is endless to what we can do. It's just building and building all the energy that we can. But I don't think there's any danger.
Yeah, I've got a friend who's very psychic, and she says that locations that have a lot of energy, like your museum, he said actually it's like a spotlight almost, or it glows in that whatever you'd want to call it, the astral field or whatever, and that anything is like you said, anything close by can see that and ends up getting drawn into it.
Yeah, I think it's like having a bit of a beacon on the roof, and the spirits can see it, and they're all attracted to it. And I think that's why we are getting so much activity, which is fascinating. And it's like I said, it's endless what we can do. We've got so many new ideas that we can try. So we've got lots more coming up soon.
All right, we have another question, and this one's for Nick. And Nick, this person wants to know that we've talked about the case of the girls attempting to kill their friend as a sacrifice to Slenderman. How many other cases have come about like this? I mean, I know this one is the one that's gotten the most publicity, but do you? I mean, have there been others? And and I know that there was a Slenderman movie, but that's a more recent thing, so I can't really think that would be like a draw for people to try to emulate that.
Yeah, I mean, there actually have been a couple of cases. There was one where a girl. This was just literally in almost the immediate wake of the attack on the girl, where a girl actually burned down her house, falling out with her mother, and turned out, she got this journal which showed she was obsessed with the Slender Man. But one that you may know, with your Nevada connection. I mean, there's this. You remember Jared Miller, who went on that shooting spree?
Yep, I know you're talking about.
Jared Miller. I mean, him and his wife, they both had obsessions with the Slender Man, and they even, had costume parties and things like that, where they dress up as the Slender Man and the Joker, and and they got caught up in that obsession as well. So, and you do find that when that happens, there's an obsession with a Slenderman. It's never anything positive. It's always got this negative kind of dark cloud around it, and it affects people's minds, and to where, that, like I said, like Lacey's story, the flight attendants, where it can really affect people's characters.
Well, the thing that I noticed about some of the cases that you had in your book was that a lot of them, a majority of it seems like, involve teenage girls, or are almost like preteen girls. I mean, is this and I can't think offhand of a lot of cases where too many boys have been involved in this Slenderman obsession.
Yeah, it is for the most part. The people who are really into the Slenderman phenomenon are children and teenagers, and a lot of them are girls. Now, there are a lot of boys as well, but yeah, I mean, you do find that most of the stories that have surfaced, or a lot of them, do revolve around girls. There's no doubt about that. But what I would say, I mean, for me, one of the most eye-opening interviews that I did, and this actually does revolve around a young boy. I did an interview with a guy named Olav Phillips, and Olav runs Paranoia magazines, which is sort of one of the last few actually printed magazines on the paranormal and conspiracies and whatever. And Olav was telling me how his son got interested in the Slenderman phenomenon. And Olav didn't know anything about this. And one day, because Olav was actually sort of working on or planning on doing something on the Slenderman for his magazine, and he just casually said to his son, who was about 6 or 7 at the time, "Have you heard of the Slenderman?" And he said his son kind of went quiet, and his son said, "Well, why are you asking?" kind of thing. And he said, "Oh, I'm just looking into it." And as Olav sort of questioned him a little bit more, his son came out and admitted that him and all his friends at school were all into the Slenderman, but they chose not to tell the parents, the grown-ups, the old guys, It was as kids, it was their little secret. And so you had this undercurrent of nearly all the kids in the class being obsessed with the Slenderman, fascinated by it, talking about it, and being very careful not to let their parents know, because it was it was their story, it was their secret. And Olaf found this fascinating, but also a little bit worrying as well. And then, of course, he thought, well, how many other kids around the country are fixating on this, and their parents don't even know? So, that's a perfect example, like a young boy having this obsession, and all his friends, and they, it's almost like a little secret society where we'll just keep it to us and don't tell anyone else. It did have kind of like a creepy vibe to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and to me, this is really fascinating because the original meme for Slenderman was that this was a thing that waited in the woods and preyed on children, and yet here its prey is actually, I guess it's like the Pied Piper of Hamelin. They're skipping merrily into its clutches, so to speak.
Well, somebody actually mentioned this to me. The idea of like the parallels with things like Stockholm syndrome. Where somebody gets kidnapped, and then they start to bond and relate to the person who kidnapped them. And that does happen, so it could be something along those lines, something along like sort of Stockholm syndrome.
So now, have you run across any cases where, now, I mean, I know that, the 2 girls in Wisconsin who tried to kill their friend to appease Slenderman. I mean, have you run across any cases where people have said that they have actually communicated with Slenderman, that he's talked to them and actually told them to do things?
Not in the sense of literally talking to them, no. There are a few cases where people had seen the Slender Man in, sort of like a sleep paralysis state, and they suddenly got like thoughts and ideas in their minds which they felt were coming from the Slender Man. And in most of those cases, it was sort of, the Slender Man wanting to be their friend, that kind of thing. Which is, again, sort of very sinister, creepy aspect of the story, but not where the only case I've got where there was like a voice was that one, the flight attendant story, but that came through the laptop. That wasn't through, by literally hearing it. But a lot of these cases do occur, when the witness is in an altered state, like as I said, like sleep paralysis or, something along those lines. So it's almost as if, the medium in terms of communication usually does take place not in a regular situation for the most part. It's always in, an altered state or something like that.
It makes me think the woman who saw the figure on her laptop and actually heard the voice. She said that she was researching. She actually had a room that she had put up pictures of Slender Man. It had almost become an obsession. It makes me think back to Albert K. Bender, who had his room. With all kinds of pictures of movie monsters and things like that, and then his experience with the Men in Black, which I know that you brought up in your book, the similarities to a certain extent between the Men in Black and the Slender Man.
Yeah, and I think, it goes back to that angle of be careful what you wish for. I think when people obsess on, you can take the paranormal out of the equation. If people obsess on anything, it's never really a good thing, because it affects the rest of your life and your free time and whatever. So, but when it's something that's really perceived as dangerous and supernatural and hostile, and that's what you're obsessing on, then it can get even worse. And I think that's probably what also, like you said, happened with Albert Bender. He created this supernatural altar in his attic in Bridgetown, Connecticut in the early 50s, and suddenly these strange, pale-faced men in black literally kind of materialized when he was kind of semi-awake, and and they kind of intruded on his mind almost. So I think, you could make an argument that in some cases, all of these things, or many of them, are kind of interconnected in sometimes in more realistic ways, others kind of a vague way. But there is that sort of angle, the Men in Black, the Shadow People, the Hat Man, the Slender Man. They've all got the black suit, and they're all kind of pale, and they prey on us,
Well, and there's the black-eyed children as well. I mean, even though they're not tall and faces like the Slender Man, they seem to kind of fit within that hierarchy of creepy creatures.
Well, I do sometimes wonder if because there's a greater level of Black-Eyed Kid report today. I sometimes wonder, if there was an original phenomenon which is still around, but also could there actually be a thought form version now of the Black-Eyed Kids as well? Because it's not quite attained the following as the Slender Man has, but certainly it does have a big following. So maybe you've got a crossover there too, possibly.
It is interesting how the Slender Man has taken off, so to speak, has gained that popularity. I mean, I'm surprised that there hasn't been a like an Adult Swim cartoon produced about Slender Man.
Well, it's interesting that the following is pretty much kids and teenagers. It's not something that, for the most part, attracts a lot of adults. I mean, from my perspective, I wrote the book because I found the phenomenon fascinating, but I don't find the issue of the Slenderman fascinating to where I want to get involved, with chat rooms and forums and, create my own pictures. I have no interest in doing anything like that. My only interest in it is from the perspective of the phenomenon and how it's developed and how it affects people, which is very different to the angle that the kids are taking. They're just excited by this character that they're obsessing with. So in other words, it really is something primarily just for kids and adults, kids and teenagers.
Mm-hmm. Which makes me think, that possibly these kids are identifying, with this thing because, I don't know, maybe it represents, like that deep, dark, primal thing that's within all of us and is especially close to the surface, when you're a teenager, because, as you're an adult, you learn to kind of suppress that kind of stuff. But when you're a kid, that rage a lot of times is just so close to the surface.
Yeah. And I think, that's why I said there could be several different explanations. I mean, like with the attack that the girls did on their former friend in Waukesha, Wisconsin. You have people who take the view that there's a paranormal aspect to it, but then you've got, another angle where people are sure that they became so obsessed and they blurred the lines between reality and fiction to where they couldn't distinguish between the two, and then the worst scenario happened. So again, there are different arguments and points of view as to which view is valid, and again, a lot of it just purely does, by definition, we're dictated to come one theory or another, or several theories, and that's what's happened. There's radically different views on what's going on. So.
All right, gentlemen. Well, we're getting close to the end of the program, so I want to give you both a chance to let our audience know where they can find out more about you. Neil, again, what's the name of your museum? Where is it located? And what hours are you open?
Okay, the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley in Leicestershire. You can find us on Facebook. We are open Friday between 3 and 6, Saturday 10 till 4, and Sunday 1 till 4. We also invite paranormal groups to come in and investigate in the evenings, and we do lots of different live feeds.
When do you usually do your live feeds? And when do you make like an announcement? Like a couple of days, on your Facebook account on when you're going to do them?
And we do a Monday night live feed between 8 and 9. That's when we just put an item on the table and the viewers just tell us what they sense or feel from the item. But we also do on location live feeds. All the information is on the Facebook. So that's the best place to find it, really.
Mm-hmm. And if somebody has an item of their own that they'd like to donate to you, I mean, do they get a hold of you on Facebook or, ring you up on the phone or what?
Yeah, just get me on Facebook. That's the easiest way.
All right, and Nick, what about yourself? Your recent book is the Slenderman. Let me find it here. The Slenderman Mysteries, but you also have a new one out called Control, MK Ultra Chemtrails. Where can people find these books?
Well, all my books are available on Amazon, and about 2/3 of them you can get off the shelves in Barnes & Noble. And the Slenderman Mysteries book you can get off from Barnes & Noble as well. And people can reach me at my blog, which is called World of Whatever, and the address is nickredfern40.blogspot.com, or you can find me at Twitter, Nick Redfern UFO, or same with Neil at Facebook as well.
All right, and I know this is a stupid question, Nick, but got any new books that you're working on right now?
I actually do have a couple. I've got one which comes out next month. It's actually my 5th Men in Black book, and
oh wow!
So that'll be out. It's actually put out by my agent's company, Lisa Hagen Books, and that'll be out round about probably late April, something like that.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. We have to wrap up the show for tonight. So I appreciate you both being on with us on Exploring the Bizarre. And I want to thank our audience for listening in as well. So good night from myself and Tim Beckley. And be sure to tune in again this time next week for more Exploring the Bizarre. Good night.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.